There are certain words in the English language that manage to carry so much weight. Terms like love, or fear, or censorship. Terms that on their own seem so tiny and simplistic, but in actuality are very big and important terms. To me especially. I've actually been in the book business for almost 10 years. It was a big part of my life, and where I worked, we actually had a motto which is delete censorship. It was our way of saying that you should be able to enjoy any kind of art. In fact, our shirts even said that we sell banned books. It was just our own little thing. And now, well, there's a lot of talk about censorship when it comes to PlayStation 4 games, so I wanted to really try and dig into it. What's up gamers, DreamcastGuy here, and I spent the last couple weeks really trying to investigate this topic to see what's really going on and try and boil down what's going on and why. For the most part, I want to be clear about something. There is a tremendous amount of misinformation going around with the idea of certain PlayStation 4 games being blocked or changed. Now, in my opinion, there are three separate kinds of censorship that are actually going on currently with the PlayStation 4. There's games that Sony is flat out blocking, there's games that Sony is making them change, and then the third group is stuff that supposedly are games that are changing themselves in order to avoid being blocked by Sony. Now let's talk about this one first because it's unfortunately the one that seems to be getting the most headlines. There are certain projects that are very, very high profile and very, very loved, but simultaneously seem to have been edited by the game developers at the last possible minute as a way to possibly circumvent getting a higher rating or possibly being, well, deterred or maybe even delayed on a Sony console. Now, one of these is actually Resident Evil 2. So obviously this came out earlier this year. Everybody loves it. It sold like record-breaking numbers. But funny enough, in Japan, it was actually pretty heavily censored. They required that they actually remove a lot of the blood and gore. They actually even re-edited some cutscenes to be, well, just a little bit less gooey and bloody. And I think that this is interesting, but it's to me not the biggest red flag. Something else that sort of got a bunch of different talk was the character models in Mortal Kombat 11. Now, most of the people in this game are still big buff people trying to rip each other's spines literally from their still living bodies, but some people were a very much, how do I phrase this? They were very, very fixated on the costumes. A lot of times, the women are just not as skimpily clad as they previously had been, and this definitely seemed to anger a lot of people. And it seems like one of the main conspiracy theories going around is the fact that Sony is really trying to crack down on sexually charged content. This is some of the games that are being banned the most often, and it seemed like possibly, perhaps the creators of the game were trying to edit their own content before they got in trouble with Sony. Now, I just want to say, this is unfortunately sort of a true thing. Maybe not with Mortal Kombat 11, but in general, artists have been known to sort of change their own stuff in a way to make sure it's more accepted, more digestible, more understood in general. And I think that this is something that is definitely happening to at least some degree. Because we gotta move on to the next style of censorship, which are the things where Sony themselves is actually stepping in to purposefully and directly change something. Now this is actually happening quite a bit. Most of it is stuff like Dead or Alive 3 Scarlet actually had crazy booby physics, and they actually made them remove that in the American version only on PlayStation 4, which is funny because when you see it on something like the Nintendo Switch, these features are still fully intact. We've also seen them actually step in and require them do patches and updates for certain other content. Like, very famously, of course, it's the fact that in America, there was all the butts blurred out in Devil May Cry 5. A very small change and something that I don't think fundamentally changes the game itself, but is seemingly Sony stepping in to try and change the art. Now, I actually think that this stuff is not super egregious, but it is a little bit weird to me. I also want to say that there's this weird misconception that it's just like like dirty, flirty games and stuff, when in actuality, it seems like Sony is possibly trying to change some violent stuff as well. Like, last year, there was a game that was about to come out that is just so bad. I actually gave it my award as one of the worst games of 2018, called Agony. Now, the whole point of Agony, in my opinion, was to try and make a really cringy, crazy, demonic game. It's got you trying to explore the bowels of hell, and there's all sorts of terrible, twisted creatures within it. Well, it's obviously a very, very freaking crazy, over-the-top, eccentric, and rather bloody game in general. Well, unless you're playing it on PlayStation 4. Right before release, Sony actually stepped in and required them to create a big day one patch that removed a bunch of the gore, a bunch of just random stuff like the nipples off a succubus and things like that. And it seemed like they were trying to, well, really tone down the violence of it. It's gotten to a point now where they ended up actually changing some of the PC build, apparently, and making it where if you buy this on other systems, you're getting the Sony censorship patches installed on it. It's something that I don't think is super bad, but again, is just peculiar. Like, obviously, Agony is a bad game. I mean, if they ended up deleting it off the storefront completely, I wouldn't be super offended because that game kind of just sucks. But still, you kind of have to realize that the creators had a vision in mind. They wanted to make this game that was, well, probably as cringy as possible, and Sony blocked that. Now, the third group is definitely the ones that are the most worrying, and I do think are the ones that are sort of being talked about the most right now, which is the games that are being flat out blocked. Now, some of these are only being blocked in certain countries, but still, they are titles that are being completely deadlocked by Sony themselves directly. One of them being something like Super Seducer. Now, this is just a really goofy dating game that doesn't give very good advice. If you actually tried to use this to talk to women, you'd probably be arrested. But for some reason, right before it was going to be released, Sony said, yeah, that's not happening. We also have a thing that just popped up this week, which was, what was it called? Omega Labyrinth. This is like a puzzle, weird, goofy game. And as you can see, in the rest of the world, the logo sort of has some tiggo-bitties. And here in America, it's not. It's going to be very heavily edited. Apparently, the term that was used by the developers is that Sony is requiring us to change the game to be something you'd be comfortable to play in public. Now, I don't know what this means. That's such a vague terminology. It could mean that they're having them edit out really graphic cutscenes. It could mean that they're having to change the reward system. We're not exactly certain, but still, it is very clear at this point that Sony is actually going in and during the certification process, as they review the playability of a certain project, they are simultaneously basically grading whether or not they think it's too graphic for audiences. Now, even if you're somebody who's not somebody who's particularly interested in any of the games I've directly mentioned in this, you have to see the bigger picture here, which is that anytime a person is telling you what art you're allowed to see, it's not exactly great. I mean, I'm not saying that I completely condone any of these games or saying that they're super must-have amazing projects, so much as it is that I'm just trying to say it's weird to see a company telling you what games you are allowed to play. Now, I don't think that this is illegal. This is not a free speech issue. Sony is a private company. They're allowed to do whatever they want. I mean, if somebody wants to ban you off Twitter, that's not a free speech issue. They are a private company. If Sony wants to block a game, we can't sue them for it because they're a private company. I just think that, in general, it is a practice that will, in the long run, bite them in the rear end. If you are trying to open up your platform, I definitely think that you need to try and put the barriers of what is blocked as far down the road as you can. You should still, definitely in my opinion, you shouldn't have games that let you like torture kids and stuff. Absolutely, that stuff needs to be blocked. But stuff like this that's just general goofy cartoonish violence or super eccentric weird stuff like, I don't know, a puzzle game that lets you see some titter tatters, that's not a big deal. And the fact that they're actually exerting so much of their own influence to try and block it, to me, is not just peculiar, but is just so freaking alarming. I want these games to be pure. I want these games to be accessible. I want these games to be the exact original vision of the creators as they come to our consoles. But this is just my opinion. What do you think of this? Are you actually worried about some future upcoming games? Do you think that maybe the censorship is why we don't have a crazy humping minigame in God of War? Well, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, share with your friends, and subscribe if you haven't already. But do me the biggest favor of all and keep dreaming. Oh man. It's funny the amount of people that just, this is a complicated topic, but there's just so misinformation about it. Next time somebody starts talking about Sony censorship, share this video to them. That way they get a better and clearer understanding as to what's really going on. They're not just banning everything, they're just banning some really weird stuff. Thanks so much for watching that video. If you want to see something else, you can always click this link to see what I put up last, or, subscribe and see what's coming up next. Also, I promise that whatever I do, it'll try not to suck.